All right. So Sherry and I are here this Saturday morning in another Grail Quest live streaming for you all. You're all invited to join us with your questions and comments, or if you're bold enough to drop into the conversation with us. I'm going to get the ball rolling. I called this one about evil and death because essentially the thing I'm going to start with today was from one of our really smart, loyal listeners
Hmm.
named Oscar,
Yep.
and he sends us a lot. He makes a lot of thoughtful comments in our comment section, and he sends the Grail Country box very thoughtful emails quite often. And I've been meaning for a while to get around to like sharing and addressing some of his. And I'm thinking maybe the live stream is the best place to do this. So I'm going to do one of his this day and at least start the conversation off
Yeah, and
that
just
way.
before you start reading it, I just want to say if Oscar's out there listening, there is
Yeah, get in
there's
here.
a link, Oscar.
Yeah,
There's a link at the top of
there's
the
a
chat.
link and we would love to talk to you. You're
Yeah, it would be
welcome.
so great.
Yeah,
It would be really
absolutely.
great.
All right. So this is what Oscar wrote. He said, I think I just had a true premonition about how the world ends, and it is not in a bang or a whimper, but in screams and tears.
Oh,
In some sense, this observation is very simple and obvious, but therefore all the more terrifying. It is essentially Girardian in inspiration, but Girard must be complimented since mimesis does not sufficiently explain the dynamics of the seeming inevitability of this tragic end. I have been pondering the question of evil for a while now, and have been deeply dissatisfied with the inability of theology and philosophy to explain what evil actually is.
hmm.
The best theoretical answer has always been as some sort of privatio boni, which doesn't actually explain anything and only concedes that evil is a mystery.
Yeah.
Well, evil can be explained, since I realize that the true phase of evil is simply violence. Violence is something like anti becoming slash being,
Hmm.
destruction, cannibalism, coercion. It is the use of it, it is to use the potency of being against being in some way. Violence, evil, has many forms, but the logic remains the same. It isn't always motivated by the same emotions, but it is always destructive in some way. It isn't always physical, of course, but spiritual as well. Violence seems to be inherent not just to not just nature, but to the human being itself. This is why some sort of Gnosticism is needed, since violence is a substantial part of being and not just some lack to be filled. I think Jung was pretty close with the concept of the shadow, and the way to holiness is the alchemical work of making darkness light,
Hmm.
like sublimating the evil energy of rage into something productive, like working out. Of course, the Bible already tells us this, since the first thing that happens after the fall, the birth of humanity, is that Cain kills Abel, meaning that we all have Cain and Abel within us. In the Iliad, as Simone Weil brilliantly showed in her essay, far from being the glorification and praise of violent heroism, it is actually a deconstruction. And of course, Christ doesn't merely die, but is murdered by violence. Crucial distinction.
Hmm.
What makes this revelation about violence, evil, truly apocalyptic is the thesis that you cannot defeat violence by violence. This is very simple. I'm going to pause here. This is my commentary, which is very similar to Jesus saying, resist not evil. This is what makes the nature of violence so terrifying. Ares is just and kills those who kill. The Iliad. All they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Matthew 26:52. Violence can only perpetuate violence, and all the kingdom of peace. And if the kingdom of peace shall ever come, it mustn't come by violent means. As T.S. Eliot observed, the greatest treason to do the right deed for the wrong reason. The most profound temptation is to combat evil by evil, violence by violence, on moral grounds. This means that as soon as someone concedes the fact that they are not a pacifist, they are affirming the eventual end of the world in bloody war. And this, I must confess, is where I myself stand. I cannot, in any realistic or even moral sense, imagine, even theoretically, a world where all violence is done away with. I personally could go through life forswearing all violence on moral grounds. I can imagine lots of instances where I would probably be forced to kill or damage another being if someone attacked my family, fighting the Nazis, and so on. This seeming impossibility of total peace is the most terrifying fact of all.
Hmm.
Humanity has the answer, but we will never do the hard work of converting our evil into good, since we think we need our evil to do good. Now, as the dynamics of violence, evil, and why and how it happens, etc., that's another topic. I, of course, don't know if my analysis here is correct. It is indeed impossible to create essential peace out of violence. Then the substantial bloodthirst of humanity will eventually destroy everything. Of course, I hope that what is impossible for man is possible for God, but I must be a realist before I have faith. I'm generally against all sorts of paranoid conspiracy thought or the apocalyptic alarmism that is very in vogue now. But I think this is a tragically sober reflection on the nature of reality. This also means that all Christian political solutions that are not radically pacifist are probably not Christian at all, and will not be enough. This means that it is essentially impossible to be a Christian proper, but hopefully one won't be tempted beyond what one can handle. If the thesis that I built on this is wrong, and it is indeed possible to contain violence by practicing violence in a peaceful way, then that changes my conclusion. I obviously really doubt it. These violent delights have violent ends. As some profound poet once said, sorry, I just had to share my thoughts. Respond or not, I'm fine either way. If you guys could reflect on the nature of violence, where it might lead, and how to realistically fight it, then I would, of course, be grateful. Cheers, Oscar. So that's just a little tiny...
That's an amazing...
a little tiny thread for us to start unwinding and see.
Yeah. I mean, this is your wheelhouse, Nate. I because I have waffled around on this whole subject quite a bit over the years, as you know. But, you said to me one time, and it made me pause. You said to me one time, I think you're a pacifist, Sherry, or you're an anarchist or something to that effect. And first of all, I hate categories, right? So I just really don't want to put myself into one. And then secondly, I don't really know what that definition entails. So
it's fun. It's funny. I have to just interrupt really quickly because I just noticed that Chris Petcow is in the chat, and it's like as I was reading that, I'm like, I really hope Chris shows up. And not only did he show up, and he immediately offered a provoking comment. Yeah. Chris, if you want to jump in the chat with us, please, by all means. I was actually thinking of you as I read the comment from Oscar.
That would be great. Yeah.
So we would love for you to do that. And Oscar would love to be convinced of it too. As would I, by the way. It's really hard. It's really like it's actually not it's a very difficult way to look at the world. It's very hard. It's much easier to just fall into what's natural and what's not seemingly impossible. But I actually think as Christians, we're called to do impossible deeds, and there's no way around it.
This is what I wanted to get at, because I've had a couple of experiences in my life where I could have returned violence for violence, and I never did. It always astounded me that I never did, but I couldn't, for as much as I tried to make sense of it in my mind, to return the violence for violence, there was just no logical reason to do so. And so I didn't. But that's how I worked it out at the time. And Matthew 11:12.
Not being actually, I'm a Protestant now these days, so technically, I'm Anglo-Catholic.
Uh-oh. I'm gonna look it up.
I'm looking it up right now.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, I was already on it.
Okay.
You have a preferred? Let's go from the King James version. All right, Matthew 11:12. And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. Oh my gosh, that's a really strange forced reading, Chris. I got to be honest with you. You really think that's a? Oh, I want to go to the Greek on that one. Hold on a second.
I have nothing to add to that. Like I said, this is not my wheelhouse. But the one thing that stood out to me about Oscar's email was that
Yeah, this is like, I mean, this is clearly a reference to violent men
it sounds like a
trying to
cliche.
take the kingdom by force. Like, this is like, that's precisely the opposite of, that's actually a warning against the subjection of the kingdom by violent men, which I would say is kind of the legacy of Christendom, to be perfectly honest.
It sounds like he's quoting something.
I don't know. I think he's got a particular reading of that verse in mind, but it doesn't support, like, on the face of it, it just doesn't support what he's saying.
I mean, Matthew is quoting something. Like, you know, there are these sayings, right? Like, oh, what was the one? Anyway, I don't remember, but it sounds like a saying that
I think to just try to steel man what Chris might be saying there. What he's saying is that there's something that it's implicit that if men of violence are trying to seize the kingdom by force, then it falls upon Christians to defend the kingdom. But it doesn't follow from that, Chris, that it falls upon us to defend it by violence, because Jesus also says, resist not evil. So I wish I'd get in there.
Yeah,
I would like to actually talk
about it. I don't know how constructive it is going to be to talk about, to define like violence. Like Lost Cause says, I agree with Chris, killing a deer on a hunt is not evil, maybe sin. Like this, to me, this is really it depends, subjective in a sense, because it depends on the situation. I mean, if you're killing a deer and then leaving it laying in the bush because you just have, want to kill something, well, then it's sin. But if you're killing a deer because you're hungry and you take the thing apart and you process it and you feed your family and your neighbors, it's not, so like, and this is the problem with these.
Well, it's also not, killing a deer to feed your family is not, it actually ignores a lot of the nuance of what Oscar was saying. Yeah. Hey, it's Tom. Tom's in the comments. It ignores a lot of the nuance of what Oscar was saying, because Oscar was talking about violence as actions that are whether they be physical or not, but they're actions that act contrary to being or becoming.
Right.
Essentially contrary to life. They're actions that are on the side of death. And I would say something like killing. I'm not a vegan, and I'm not suggesting everybody be vegan. I don't think that killing animals for food is in any way a violence against being. It's actually a quite natural and human participation in the cycle of life.
If everybody was vegan, I'll just say this: if everybody became a vegan, you'd have to kill the animals anyways, because they would take over. You'd be killing probably a lot more animals if you at some point you'd be culling huge swaths of domesticated cows and sheep and goats, and because they're just going to reproduce and yeah. So
yeah, I wouldn't even say that killing a deer on a hunt is a sin. Like, why would it be a sin?
Only if you.
Although I will say, I wish unfortunately it's Sabbath, so none of our Jewish friends will be joining us. But the Jewish tradition does look suspiciously at hunting as a very Gentile thing.
Hunting is Jacob and I talked about this once on a live stream. It's hunting is an exploitation. Yeah.
All right, Luke, you troll. Came on the end of that reading. Did or has somebody defined
Yeah,
violence?
no, we have defined violence.
Yeah. So Oscar actually, so he did in his Oscar was his working definition of violence was that is something that acts against, and he said being or becoming because he didn't want to. I think he didn't want to get into the weeds about whether it's being or becoming.
That was my whole
So
point, Nate,
so
about
he's like essentially. I think
very
so.
difficult.
I think he would mean something that is anti-being or
We're both
anti-becoming
wearing
in
the
its
same shirt.
nature is his definition.
Nate, we're both wearing the same shirt, apparently.
Really? Oh well, we are both wearing. Yeah, we're similar. Yeah,
We're
that's true.
both in the north.
Exactly. We look like Pacific Northwesterners. We're all a bunch of. We have our coffee and our flannel. Like,
cheers.
Deal with it.
Sorry, I interrupted you. I couldn't help it. Tom, you should come on here. I think I've never met you, but I've heard lots of great stuff about you, and I want you to help us to define this violence, because I personally, that was my whole point, is that if we want to do this, we're going to end up having to define violence, and that's going to be super subjective. It's like, that's why I use the deer hunting thing as a illustration, because you can't just throw out these blanket statements, right? It doesn't work that way. That's the problem I have with pacifism, because it just makes like this golden rule, and then you could be participating in something truly evil if you don't return violence with violence. Like this is the thing that I struggle with, Nate. Right? Mm-hmm. You could actually be participating in something truly evil.
Yeah, and Oscar is honest, and he acknowledges that. Like, so he's like he talks about there's all kinds of scenarios where he imagines where he would have no choice, and this is the way I look at it. It's like in an incomplete and fallen world that is still becoming what it's intended to be, sometimes your only choices available to you are evil.
Yeah. Well, that's
the question is like what? So, and if we want to look at it, so if the nature of evil is, let's get away from the word violence, because essentially he's defined violence as being anti-becoming, acting like an action that acts against being. And I think that violence definitely falls into that category. And I don't know if everything that falls in that category could be lumped in with violence, although maybe, I'm not sure. Let's just leave that open for now. But so the opposite of that would be to do something that is on the side of it, right? So that's pro becoming. So I would say like your daily activities on your farm are good. Like inherently so, because they're on the side of unambiguously on the side of becoming, right?
Right.
My job, not so much. Probably neutral. It's probably not evil. It's probably not good either. I like redact documents and argue with lawyers.
Somebody has to argue with them.
Oh yeah, sometimes, yeah. And most of my requesters are lawyers. So in that case, you can see where you may have no path that is merely good open to you, right?
Mm-hmm. Like this don't you think, Nate, this is where
then again, it's like, have you seen A Hidden Life? It's like,
yeah, I have.
I mean, he didn't choose to fight Nazis. He didn't choose to cooperate with them either.
But he was never put in a position where someone he loved was at risk.
Was threatened directly.
That's one. And then he also didn't have to participate as an observer in any kind of horrible thing, right?
Right.
And so this is what I find difficult about the general rule of, like Luke says here, or Lost Cause said, so are you guys saying pacifism is wrong? And then Luke said, I think Sherry and I would say it's not wrong or right. And that's really how I feel about it. Like, that's why I'm saying it's subjective, right? Because you have to know that when you participate in a violent act, you're going to take something away from yourself. You're going to destroy yourself in some way, right? But the question is, and this is the choosing between two evils, right? Is that part of you that dies, is it going to be bigger or smaller than the part of you that dies if you don't do something?
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. That's the balancing act.
Yeah.
But I do think that but we're put in that position because of the world's fallen and incomplete state.
Yeah. Exactly.
Lost Cause asked some questions about violence on the part of God, which is actually not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're actually talking about human violence right now.
Yeah.
And I would just say there's a long patristic tradition of reading those verses of God's violence in the Old Testament as being about hostility towards sin. And I don't think God is on the favor. I don't think God was in favor of the genocide of the Amorites. Sorry. That's a way you can read it if you want to, but I think it's an evil way of reading it that forgets that we're supposed to be looking at Christ in the entire text as Christians.
Okay, well, here's the hardest thing to figure out, Nate.
Yeah.
That the world was created, right? The foundation of the world was the lamb slain.
Right.
Right. And so essentially, as Christians, we're claiming that the world was made through an act of violence. I mean, you could call it an act of sacrifice too.
Well, it's not violence toward another. It's self-sacrifice.
Yeah, but it was someone
which is like I mean, and this is interesting because in most pagan myths, like the world comes about through an actual act of violence, right?
Yeah.
So it's like take in Norse mythology, the world is like carved from the corpse of the giant emir, right? You have similar figures in other mythologies too, like Tiamat.
Yeah.
Same thing, the slaying of Tiamat. So yeah. Did I miss that?
A theology of violence?
Oh, I think it must be a title, I think, that he's talking about. Toward a Theology of Violence. Yeah, it's a title he's referencing.
Okay.
I wish who I wish was available this morning to jump in on this one is Julian. Because he would obviously have, as a Hutterite, he would actually have like pretty strong opinions on this.
That's his views. Yeah.
Because they're very committed to
way of living. Let me ask you this, Nate, because you're familiar with him better than I am. David Bentley Hart says he's not a pacifist.
Yeah, that's something that I strongly disagree with him about.
Okay, so what are his reasons? Do you know? The only time I heard him like be pressed on it was when he appeared on David Gornowski's podcast. Yeah.
And David Gornowski is basically like, how to describe him? He has Christian anarchist leanings, but at the end of the day, he's like kind of a partisan shill for a lot of conservative politicians, but he does have some good ideas. He was pressing like David Bentley Hart calls himself a Christian anarchist too, but he has a lot of sympathies toward like state socialist programs that I wouldn't share, for example. And David like really pressed him on the coercive nature of trying to even out wealth inequality by the use of force on the part of the state. And David's answer to that was, I'm not a pacifist. And he just kind of just like, he didn't really much defend his position.
Mm.
And I really thought David Gornowski, that is, kind of made him like, he got the better of him in that exchange, I thought. But I am already inclined to agree with Gornowski because I'm against coercion. I just don't think it's appropriate or correct way to go about doing anything.
Okay, so how is that?
And I think that's deeply rooted, as you can see. Like, I think I would point people toward our conversation on letter 11 of Meditations on Matero on force, as like as talking about the deep theological reasons as to why that's the case. So,
okay, so from the very little that I understand about Kant would agree with you. Like, he would say that there is no room for violence, right? Like, to Kant, you also can't lie, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you can't do any of these things, right? But when you do them in some situations, you can cause someone horrible harm, right?
Right.
Like if the Nazis come pounding at your door and they want to know where you've hidden all the Jews, according to Kant, you would have to tell them, right? And then they would all die. And so then, was that at your hand that they died? Sort of, somehow, right?
Okay, I'm going to address this one because I'm a football fan. You've lost the thread. You have not paid attention to what the definition of violence that we are using. For the sake of this conversation, we had a viewer who was talking about violence in a particular way, was giving a particular definition of violence. There is nothing in the violence of football that is anti-being.
No.
At all. It's not violent in that. It's not violent in that sense. It's just, I think football is good, manly sport, and okay, I'm a Christian anarchist and a pacifist. This is not a contradiction.
Okay, now you have to define violence, then, I guess, like Tom said.
Well, I don't. Yeah. Do we need to? I'm not. This wasn't. So we're addressing. There was a violence of. I will go back and read it again.
Yeah.
Because he actually did define. We're playing with someone else's definition of violence, and I think we're losing the track because the deeper question violence is a big sidetrack here, because what Oscar's question really is what is the nature of evil, and why does it have this curious positivity when theologically we best understand it to be a privatio boni, like a privation. So how is it that it still has so much force and impact in our lives, and it has this unexplainable curious positivity? We need to understand. So he was trying to use violence as like a more tangible, embodied thing that we could use to understand what's going on with evil. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not suggesting that the way he defined it is correct, but for the purposes of this discussion, I wanted to see where his definition would lead us.
Right. And
so essentially what is a discussion of evil. And he says,
evil? Yeah.
He says, where is he? Okay. Where did he find it? I have been pondering the question of evil for a while now, and have been deeply dissatisfied with the inability of theology and philosophy to explain what evil actually is. The best theoretical answer has always been some sort of privatio boni, which doesn't actually explain anything and only concedes that evil is a mystery. Now, by the way, I explicitly do not agree with that statement.
Can you reread it? Reread that?
But I just wanted to entertain the idea to see where it led us. He just says the best theoretical answer has always been some sort of privatio boni, which doesn't actually explain anything and only concedes that evil is a mystery. I think it explains more than he thinks it does, and okay. I don't think it. And he has mystery in quotation marks, which supposes a sort of a degree of sarcasm. I think we can make more sense out of evil as a privatio boni than he thinks we can. And you can see some of that in many of other conversations that I've had about that. So, but that's what he's saying. And then he says, here's where he actually defines it. Well, evil can be explained. And since I realize that it's truth, the true face of evil is simply violence. So he calls like violence is the face of evil. Violence is something that is anti-being, becoming. So he is defining violence is anti-becoming / being, destruction, cannibalism, coercion. It uses the potency of being against being in some way. That I think is that part right there is a better definition. I think that's a good definition of evil, but I don't think that necessarily is a good definition of violence.
Right. Someone wrote in the comments, according to Fichte, you have to fight the Nazis. Oh, wait, there we go. To the death once you tell the truth. Okay, so like when I read that, I think to myself, okay, so you tell the truth because you have to be right. You see, like, because you have this idea of, you have a morality basically that you live in. You live in this framework, this moral framework, right? And so the Nazis come to the door. They want to know where the Jews are hidden. You tell them the truth because you have to be right, because you have to live within your framework, and then you try to kill them. Okay, like I'm just like, what is happening here? Like this is just so wrong. It's all off to me, the whole thing, right? Because you get trapped in your own. This is why I say oftentimes discernment, right? So let's say you lied to the Nazis. What's going to happen to you if they find out that you lied? They're gonna take you and the Jews to the concentration camp, right? And so essentially you have sacrificed yourself by lying.
When I was at Thomas Aquinas College, there's this thing I still remember. This was pretty memorable. There was a discussion we had in seminar, and the discussion was whether it's ever appropriate to lie, and people brought like lying to the Nazis was like the immediate go-to answer.
Yeah.
And my theology instructor didn't necessarily answer the question one way or another, but he certainly but he made it more interesting to think about, because then he then told the story about some French nuns who, when the Nazis showed up to ask if they were hiding Jews, and they were, said, well, yes, of course we're hiding Jews. Come right in and look. And then everybody laughed and the Nazis went away.
Yeah. Well, then there's the story too of, I think it's Saint Dionysius, a different, not the Arapagite or whatever, but anyway, and he went into the barn, and the murderer of his brother was hiding in there, right? And he didn't let the guy know that he knew who he was. And the guy didn't know that he was the brother of the man he had just murdered. And he fed him and clothed him and cared for him and sent him on his way. And when the authorities came looking for him, he lied to them. He told them that he had never been there. Okay. And then the guy returned, having found out at some point that this was actually the brother of the man he had murdered, and ended up becoming a monk, as tradition tells the story, right? Ended up becoming a monk and asking for forgiveness and repented. And so like this is why I hate categories. I hate these overall blanket statements of, okay, what do we got here? Willing violence, perhaps, is willing something other than God as another's end. Doing violence would be to seek to bring another to some end other than his or her fullness in God as the good. Yeah. Well, yeah.
I like that, Tom. That's good.
You're playing God. You're playing God when you enact violence. But I don't know. I think.
Well, I would say, so there's something to do with there's some connection between both evil and violence, and the move that we make to impose our view of reality on others. Like we think that we know what's real, and we don't really care. Like we don't really care if other people come to see it on their own. We just are so convinced that we have the correct view of reality that we're just going to make sure everything lines up in accordance with this vision that we have by any means necessary.
So I got rid of those.
Oh, thank you. You were quicker on it. So by the way, I apologize. I do not have the attention span to adequately keep up with the
good.
chat.
We're in this
thank
together.
you for helping me out, Sherry. If God is a summum bonum, and if God is our highest good, then violence would be willing or doing whatever wills or seeks some other end than God for another. Yes or no?
Yeah, this is the difficult question here.
Yeah, I would say that's right. And I think that's kind of like what Oscar is trying to point toward, which is what makes it so hard, because he's pointing out how ubiquitous it is. But I don't think we should be surprised at that. This is what I made a comment earlier that, like, yes, this seems impossible, but we are asked to do impossible things. I'm thinking of Tomberg. Tomberg has that great line. Which letter is it in? I don't remember which letter it's in, but he has that great line about how it's the one that has the discussion of memory, where he talks about like acts that are truly free acts are the ones that are not automatic. Right? So the difficult sayings of Christ that seem impossible for us, things like love your enemies and resist not evil, those are truly free actions. If you just do what everyone expects you to do and everyone thinks is good common sense, you're not doing anything free at all.
Well, so let me mess up the waters a little bit.
Go for it.
So you have the example of the monk that I gave, who didn't turn in the man to the authorities. And in order to do that, he had to lie. Okay, so he lies. Is he imposing his will then on that man? And is he imposing his will on the man if he doesn't lie and tells them where? Because he's making a judgment call. He's essentially saying, I think it's better if he's arrested, or I think it's better if he is not arrested. Okay. So, this is why I think that we have to.
In that story, though, he does will the good. He wills the good for that. He wills what's good for that man's soul.
Yeah, but what if the man went and killed somebody else? He was a murderer.
Well,
I'm just saying, like, he has no way of knowing that, right? So
that's trust. Again, this is trusting in our human mindset when it comes to judgment and justice and mercy, and thinking that we understand something about it, but we don't. We understand nothing about it.
This is the thing. Like,
so I would say that his action was an act of divine magic.
The monk. I mean, the guy that let the guy go.
Yeah. Which is why it bore the spiritual fruit that it did.
Right. And it has to come from above. Okay. So this is right. Like Luke mentioned that, right? Luke mentioned, I don't know, somewhere in there, that you have to depend on the Spirit, right? And I think this is really what it boils down to. That's why
I'm gonna take this off so people don't say we're wearing the same shirt again.
What if I took mine off and I was wearing the same T-shirt as you?
Oh, that would be funny.
Oh, anyway, this is why it just gets sticky for me, this whole conversation, because
this is a hard problem. It's a hard problem. And that's why I found it interesting and thought, Chris is joining us.
Good.
Hey, Chris, good to see you, man.
I forgot my phone.
That's all right. I just took mine off, so it's not... Good to see you. Very good to see you. How's
good
the
to see
family?
you guys too.
How's the family?
I think that this conversation is interesting because of how quickly you fall into contradictions.
Yeah,
Like almost,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
almost immediate that like I think it's like when you like take your microscope and like look deep, like what's the smallest thing, like a quasar or whatever, like the smallest, like, you know, the half of the half of the half of the half of the atom, and then like you start trying to dissect it, and like it starts breaking laws of physics, and it starts like not making any sense. Like what we're talking about is like extremely it's very metaphysical, and like it's very difficult to like it's very difficult to pin down.
It is. It is. And I would also say, Chris, and also our tendency to be oriented toward desiring the perfect instead of the whole is also does us damage here, because it makes us like want it makes us yeah, it makes us it keeps us unable to do um unable to do the process of becoming. Essentially, it forgets what it kind of forgets something about what we are.
Okay,
Like,
well, I think I want to talk about this contradiction thing because, Chris, for some reason, I think you leaned your phone up and now I have an echo. Did you lean your phone up on something?
Is this better?
Yeah, it's better when it's not leaning up against something. Sorry.
Oh no, I got you. It's probably, yeah, got you.
Anyways, this idea of contradiction. So the whole time we're talking about this, I can't help but think about Ivan in Brothers K, right? When he says that, you know, because of all these violent, horrible things that he's seen happen to innocent children, and he takes the innocent child as the example because it's the most heart-wrenching example out there, right? Like just absolute innocence, violence done to children. And he says, you know, because of this, I refuse that God, right? So it's not that he's an atheist. He believes in God, but he doesn't want to have anything to do with that God. And so essentially he's not able to reconcile. And so like you when you jumped in, you immediately spoke about contradiction. And this is what I think apokatastasis is. It is the reconciliation of all things, right? Especially contradiction. And I don't like that we're right in the realm of paradox that when that happens, right? Where our minds are blown, because how do we reconcile those things? But I think that is ultimately what has to happen in order and I don't know how, like I'm not saying I know how. I'm just saying that I think that this idea of good and evil is going to come together in a form of reconciliation, in like where God is all in all, okay? and then it will, you know, and then as Paul says, one day we will know as we are known, because we are contradictions. We are contradictions, you know?
yes.
Yes, we are.
I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. I think that based off that hypothesis, some violence has to also be good, because it has,
Yeah,
because
that's
what
why
you're
God is the
saying,
judge. This is the
because
thing.
yeah, because you're talking like about like almost like a wedding. You're talking about two things that are not the same trying to become one, and trying to live in harmony with each other, right? You know, like a man and a woman living in the same house together sometimes is nothing more than a miracle, you know. Hey babe, I'm just talking about you. What's up? Too loud for the baby. I'll be quieter. But yeah, but it's and it takes a miracle, right? And so like even this vision of I had to Google it, apokatastasis. What is it?
Apokatastasis.
Yeah, it has to be it's a miracle. Now miracles can happen. Now, let me go in this other room because it's too loud. basically the point I'm making. I think I woke the baby, so I have to go in a second. But the point I'm trying to make is that miracle, that contradiction, that means that the perfection can only be found in the tension between the two. So you can't eradicate one. You can't remove evil.
That's right.
You can't remove good. You have to have a tension between the two. You can't even, and to define good and evil, you have to be able to like the idea that evil goes to the line of every human heart. It has to go through every human action, through every single thing. All things can be both good and evil at the same time.
Well, how do you know the good if you don't know what evil is? Like, this is the thing, right? That this is another argument. You can't know you're sick if you've never been well. You can't know you're well if you've never been sick. Something like that. And so,
yeah, but I don't like that line of thinking, because it gives evil a necessity that I think is incorrect.
yeah, I know people hate that when you mention that, but then what about the fall? Like, then, like we're gonna go deep here, Nate, if we keep going.
Well, no, but it's appropriate. I mean, we can say though that the existence of evil is appropriate in becoming, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it can't enter into being. It can't have any absolute final ontology. It can, otherwise it ceases to be what it is. And you take it from having a curious positivity that has an impact in the realm of becoming, and then you put it into being, and then God himself has to become a mixture of good and evil. And you can no longer talk about being the good as such.
We might have to go there. Like that, I think that's where the conversation often stops, is, oh, well, God can't be evil. And I think we have to be able to try to break the conception a little bit, because you said there can't be a necessity of evil, but it seemed to be a necessity to put a tree in the garden that wasn't just the tree of good, because that would just be the tree of life. It had to be a tree of good and evil, and it also seemed to be a necessity to allow the snake to sneak in somehow. So it seems to be a requirement. To me, it's like what Peugeot talks about with the remainder. There has to be a remainder. There has to be this like inconvenient truth, this wild card that, you think about like a deck of cards, and that joker comes and just messes up the whole game because he can be anything at any time. And how does that work?
Yeah, but then you're not worshiping a God that looks more like a traditional Christian God than the Christian God. And I don't have any interest in worshiping Loki.
Okay. Break that down for me.
Well, because it's just arbitrary.
Why?
Like nothing. None of Christianity makes any sense if God is not the good as such. Like that is
we're operating in our definitions, right?
That's what I was
just our
God
definitions.
makes
It's like that's been the definition of the tradition for both Jews and Christians since there have been Jews and Christians in the world, and it's the thing that distinguishes them from the pagans, by the way, for whom the gods are just this weird arbitrary mixture of both good and evil and represent both, and they have lots of trickster figures and things like that. So the idea that God is a person and that God is good, the good as such, those are Judeo-Christian ideas.
Okay, I gotta make sure my wife's okay. But if I can come back, I'll come back, because this is extremely stimulating.
Yeah. It's good to see you again, Chris.
Yeah. See,
you always ask provocative questions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to move on to death, because that's my favorite.
God is not evil. I just have to call out Luke here. God is not evil or good. Wrong. Like if you let go of the idea that God is good, then you're not a Christian anymore. I'm just gonna be very blunt about that.
Well, but let's say this. Let's say it like this. I think this is what Luke means: is God is not moral.
Well, that's different discussion.
Yeah. And this is entanglement as far as I'm concerned, because when we start talking about good and evil, and this is what Ivan does in Brothers K, is he's talking about morality, okay? And he's making a moral judgment on God, because he's saying that God's allowing innocent children to be brutally murdered.
I scared Luke away. I'm sorry
So-
if I hurt your feelings, Luke, but I just like God is not good. I just can't I can't go there, man. I can't lie.
I agree with you. God is good, but he's not moral, right? This is not a moral question. This
Right,
is
because
something much
morality,
deeper than that.
that morality is our own duality. There is no duality in the good as such.
Okay, so let's veer off a little bit and talk about death, because now we're getting into the realm of and I know from previous comments that Oscar has made that he wasn't comfortable with talking about death in a good way. Okay.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Right.
Okay. And so this is where we get tangled up in our morality. Okay. Because, you know, I love how George MacDonald says God sees things as they are. Luke, why don't you just get in here?
Yeah, just get in here, Luke.
Jeez, you're interrupting. I can't concentrate.
Just get in here.
Okay, let's see what's Tom saying here. You're close, Nate. One can be verbally violent as well, or yeah.
Yeah, I dropped earlier on, because I thought the whole violence thing was a big sidetrack. Because really, Oscar's question is ultimately about evil.
Evil and death.
And violence is just the way he. But I actually dropped it. I dropped the definition of violence in the chat. I think I still have it. I'll just read it out because I have it in.
Yeah.
So this is the number one definition, and this is just from Standard Dictionary, Merriam-Webster's. Behavior or treatment in which physical force is exerted for the purpose of causing damage or injury. Now, Tom, I think this is the definition that Tom is referring to. And yes, and that's just the dictionary definition limits it to physical force. I would agree that with Tom, that if we expand this beyond the idea of mere physical force, and that we just like the use of force or coercion for the purpose of causing damage or injury, it's for the purpose of that is the key here. This is why it's not violent for you to kill a deer for food for your family.
This is intent. Now we're talking about intent,
Right.
and we cannot judge this. This is the problem.
Right.
We can't judge a person's heart. That's God. That's why I said to Chris, the thing, God is the judge, right? And like in one of our Job conversations, the interesting thing about that is that God judges just by his own presence. So I use the example of, imagine if you were in some kind of 500K a year club, and you had a yearly annual meeting with all your 500K income earners, right? And celebrated your the money that you made that year, and everybody's dressed up to the nines, like they got the the black tuxedo and the evening gowns, and they're just they're really in it. And then Elon Musk walks in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right? And what happens when Elon Musk walks in? He judges, right? Immediately you feel lower than him. You feel smaller than him. And this is how God judges. God judges simply by being there. And right.
That's a good comment.
Yeah.
Diana. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're being joined by a Chad.
Hey there.
Hey.
I don't think I finished my thought, but anyways, I couldn't concentrate.
I'm sorry.
It's okay, no worries.
It's not your fault. It's just my ADD having a hard time balancing the chat and the conversation at the same time.
I get that.
I need to get someone in to just like manage the chat for me so I can just be in the flow of the conversation.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Well, good morning.
Good morning,
Good
Chad.
morning, Chad. How's it going?
It's going good. I just walked out of a meeting and saw that you guys were doing. You were on the old Grail country, and thought I'd stop in and say good morning and say hello. I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation as a whole. Um, and
We're
Yeah.
we're trying to nail down pacifism, violence, and death, and sin, and evil, and good.
Basically, we're dealing with we're actually this one question that Oscar presents essentially opens us up to all of the questions Oscar keeps
Everything.
asking us.
Mhm.
Because this definitely plays into his discomfort with the way that we have had the tendency to talk about death as a positive.
Mhm.
But I think that's part of us. I think understanding death is actually not your enemy is kind of the key to understanding how all the pieces of this puzzle fit together.
Yes, exactly. That's why I said
So
back there. Let's make a little bit of a turn here, and let's start talking.
So
about
let's make that turn, because I think that's like, once you understand that, like, well, you can see that in the thing that I said about that comment about like killing the deer. Like, that's not that thinking that killing a deer could actually be an evil action when you actually are doing it for the purposes of feeding your family, and you have a respect for the animal that you're hunting, and you have a love for the natural world and the environment that you find yourself in. That is not evil. There's no way that is evil.
No,
and
it's
not being able to see death as a positive is what stops you from, like, that's why I love that Alaskan Native story about how humans are just totally incompetent, but the animals, out of love for us, like, willingly give up their bodies to feed us, and this sort of quasi Eucharistic sacrifice. Like, that's
so pagan.
And Christian at the same time.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, I mean, I think this always reminds me, like, when we get on the topic of death, I'm always reminded of the movie Don't Look Up, and the utter surprise in the characters to discover that something is going to end their lives, and like this heightened sense of like realization, we're all gonna die, and it's like, and nobody's like listening. It's like, and then we have this amnesia around death and the love of Christ, and we're wrapped up in that, and that, like, we can't. I don't know. It's like this self-centered, self-preservation thing that it's understandable to a degree, but and I think it's really understandable when you see how our culture has distanced itself from death as a whole. I'm sure you guys have already covered this, but I mean, it's like it's one of the most essential things that'll happen in life is that it will end. Yeah. And it's also necessary. Imagine if we just kept populating and none of us died. Like, it would be really annoying place.
Have you ever had the experience of being close to death yourself, Chad?
I think so. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. What was it like for you?
Well, I mean, we could say that right now I'm close to death, and I wouldn't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
just talking about those times, like those moments where those actual moments in life. If I mean, not everyone's had one where you've been forced to accept, like, oh, I'm dying right now. This is how I go out.
Yeah, I've had a few of them,
and you actually are like, you're confronted directly with the inevitability of that. I've had that experience once in my life. I'm just curious as to whether you have and whether you learned anything from that.
Yeah, I've had a few of those experiences. One of them was I was in the back seat of a car with my drummer was driving, and he was wasted, and we were going through the woods in the North Woods of Wisconsin on this back gravel road, and like, it was he was not sensible, and we were all drunk. And it dawned on me that we're going to die back here, and there was a little bit of regret there because it had dawned on me that I had not been able to I had not paid attention enough in life while I was in it to try to set things right with those I love. And so that was a huge thing there, and so that was terrifying. There was another time where I was in a TJ Maxx, and there was a tornado on the ground. And I had always said, it's really interesting. I had always said I want to see a tornado because I've never seen one other than on TV, and I would think that it'd be magnificent to see like the magnitude of a tornado. And then I was actually confronted with what that was, and there was an anxiety that was terrifying because I thought we're definitely gonna die here. And so you can have all the ideas around our comforts in death and how we're going to be able to walk face to face with it, and it'll be, we have this idealistic version of how that'll be, but I've never been able to face them with any amount of consistency to how I would thought I was going to face it. So it's very, very scary. But oddly enough, I've also toyed a lot with suicide. And so that's another thing. It's like, so, I mean, it's kind of like the idea of, this is really silly, of, you could taste a banana, but you can't really describe what it tastes like. So we could talk all day about how death is, but if you've not had death, you don't really know what it's like. And that's,
can we say the same thing about God?
Absolutely. I think so. And that's my experience. I could tell you what kind of conversion experience I've had, and some of like the most seemingly insignificant moments in my life. Like if I could tell you how something was, if I were to explain it to you, you would say, well, that's not really God. But I would say, no, that was the face of God.
Right.
And so, and then you'd be like, I don't get it. It's like, yeah, you couldn't get it unless you experienced that. And I know that we conflate some of that, as far as like solipsistic understandings, and we denigrate that, but there is a lot of value in that.
This reminds me that I do owe Luke a serious apology for the comment that I made earlier. I got caught up in being shocked by the theological phrasing of it. Obviously, none of my opinions about your theological language have touched anything on your experience of God,
Mm-hmm.
which is where things should be grounded. So for that, I apologize, Luke. So
yeah, I mean,
I was just shocked and reacted in the moment.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking forward to seeing what that was. I'm looking forward to seeing what that was, but because I haven't heard it. But like I could tell you about my experience about being puzzled by Christianity and upset and resentful at it, and then wanting to understand what it is that you all saw, because at that time I didn't have any understanding of anything to do with any of it. Not even, I mean, all the way down to, I didn't know the difference between Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, Apocastasis, any of that stuff. I didn't know any of that stuff, but I wanted to seek. And so I started listening to the Bible, and I was converted on listening to the story of Legion. And like I could tell you that, and that is one of the most real experiences of my life. But like you could hear that and say, well, that's just bullshitting yourself, and that's dumb. But I could say, well,
what was it about that story that grabbed a hold of you, Chad? Like, what was it about? Like, what was it that just like, obviously it made some kind of real impact on you? What was it about it that grabbed you?
I was confronted.
And I'm more interested about how you felt about it than how you thought about it.
I think the most of when I look at it today, when I really like try to analyze what happened there, is I really saw myself in the story. I couldn't differentiate myself between me and the Legion guy. I was like, no, that's me. And I've had an experience of being relieved of the demons that are within me, the character defects, many times in the process of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I saw there was a fact for me. It was like, no, that's absolutely true. And And I also was invited in with the question where Legion asks Christ, "Can I go with you?" And Christ says, "No, stay here and help these people, help your friends." And like there was something about that that I identified with too, because I wasn't a part of a church, and I wasn't a part of the church, but I saw, Christ is saying, no, you know, I think this is beyond our theological parameters, um, and I really identified with that. So I think Christ worked in a way that I couldn't have predicted, and he
Right.
pulled me into the story.
Well, yeah, because that figure is like the most outsider of outsiders you could possibly imagine,
Mhm.
right? Who's like not, he's such an outsider that he's not even fit to live in the land of the living. He's forced to
Right.
live in a necropolis.
Yeah, and like I think of Jesus Barabbas. I was thinking about him this morning actually,
But
and
see,
that's
there were
very
all
much like the
yeah.
Legion character.
With you, Chad, I'm totally with you. That I think your identification with that character is exactly right. And this is like, if Paul sees this, he'll be like, "Ah, I caught you being Calvinist." But I wouldn't want to say it anyway because I think it's true. It's like we're all living in a necropolis.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We're we're dead people. That's why
Yeah.
this is all so hard for us. We're dead people being called into life.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. So I'm sorry, I only have a little bit longer to go on here, but 'cause I'm having breakfast with a bunch of guys in AA. But I wanted to say this because we're all dead people. This is so crazy. So I'm in the meeting this morning, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I get this vision, almost like a dream, and I totally pull away from the topic of what's at hand, and I'm listening. I'm sitting there, and I see this vision where I walk into something like a very large hall, an old brick hall. It's only lit by candles all around, and I see all along all along sitting in thrones around the room. It's like a huge throne room. Are these ghostly figures, and they all kind of look like me, but they're not me. And I realize they're my ancestors, and they are all the people that I once was. And in the middle of this vision, I'm also sitting on a throne, and there's in front of me are four thrones, and there's my mother and my mother's husband and my mother's ex-husband. They are all on the throne, and then there's my father and his wife and his ex-wife, and they're all on a throne on the other side. And all of a sudden, somebody drags Christ into the room, and we're there to judge him. And we're all and all of a sudden, like, somebody starts talking about accounts of things that we're about to do, or things that we have done, or things that I have done. Um and all of a sudden, and we can all sense the conviction of Christ. But each account of something that's being told, some man on the throne around the room stands up and gives his objections. And we keep doing this over and over. We're going through this trial. And as we're doing this, we're all condemning Christ. And I'm having this image all in a matter of about 10 minutes as I'm sitting there in this meeting. And I'm thinking, this is how I am. This is me. I and I'm going to be shown that I am wrong. And he's, and each day, and many moments, I crucify him, and I am, and he resurrects, and I am redeemed. And it's all this very strange image that I don't really understand, and I don't know why it came to me today. But it's like what you're saying, we're all dead in some way.
That's so good, because this is it. Here's the thing. This is what Christ reveals. Christ reveals that, yes, death is a principle of the reality that we live in. That is inescapable and real. But so is resurrection.
Yes.
That's why we can stop. That's why we don't need to be afraid of it. And that's why we don't need to. This is why we can actually embrace death as a gift without being afraid of it, because we know that resurrection also exists as a principle, and that death is not the final. It is, there's no finality to it. And that is why death loses its sting, is because it no longer is, we know it, we are free from the delusion of seeing it as the last and final word.
Yes, it may no longer hold its sting, but something came to me about this. It should have reverence with us because um so as I was thinking about this image, as this image was in me, I was also confronted with the image of, if I take out all the faces that I see and all the names that I see in the Bible, and I just place myself in each of those characters, and if I were to read it as like each of these characters, all the people who are about to pick Christ to be condemned over Jesus of Barabbas, all Herod, Pilate, all these folks, I'm just placing myself. I mean, all of those characters, and that's how I probably should approach this, because there's some wisdom in that. Like, it's not even it's not wisdom around preventing doing something poorly in the future. Some of it is that, but it's also about seeing how I am that, and how I've been that, and how I have the tendency to do that. And this is the word, right? I mean, it's something like that. I'm probably sounding absolutely insane, which probably am anyways, but it was
No,
very impactful. I thought, what an interesting image to see. And I was seeing this court procedure being played out, and it was chilling. And again, this all happened in about 10 minutes. I thought, what a weird imagination God gave me. Why did he do this?
yeah. Well, Chad, thanks for sharing that. That was beautiful.
I love you guys. I'm looking
Yeah, we
forward to
love you
hearing
too.
more. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of wisdom I need to pay attention and probably listen more these days. So, God bless. Later.
Yeah, sin is the refusal to die. Yeah,
Yeah.
I heard him say
Yeah.
that.
And
I
our
want
friend,
to.
our friend Oscar, by the way, who asked us this question, this is another thing he has issue with. He specifically has been asking about this, but we're still sticking where we are on this. We have Sherry. I'm sorry, I just wanted to get that out there really quick. Go for
Yeah,
it.
I just wanted to get back to this right here from Tom, where he says, I think we require dying in order to confront the truth of our finitude. And what's interesting about that is that there's this spiral dynamic to that idea. If you think about the fact that we don't only have to confront the truth of our finitude to become something. Now, maybe I have this wrong, so I'm just thinking out loud as I go along here. But we also have to become within our finitude, right? So, like, we need time. We need time. Time is on our side, and of course, as you get older, you realize that more and more. You know, you start running out of time, but at the same time, you realize how much time has been your friend, because you're able to look back over something and see the hand of God in your life, or various other things. There's so many things to see, but so that was something that I thought was interesting, because it's not only that, like, it's so what's the word I want to use here? It's so interconnected that it's oh, thank you, Tom. I needed to hear that, because I'm just like, it's I don't want to say it's the Ouroboros. It's not the closed world of the serpent, right? But it is circular in a way, but it's a spiral, right? It's this spiral dynamic thing. So we need to be born into something, and we need to die. And that doesn't just happen once in our lives. That happens over and over and over again, right? We have that. We make our way through that cycle of birth, death, and resurrection, which is the U shape, right? So, but to get to Oscar's concern about talking about death in a positive light. I understand the concern, but I think that it can be done in a way that is spiritually beneficial. And Father Bear has actually been the best example for me regarding this, because he's not explicit about it. He doesn't just come out and say, well, it's a good thing.
Well, then, honestly, if I'm going to be serious here, we're okay. So we're a faith tradition that believes in resurrection, right?
Right.
That means that death is absolutely necessary for our eschatology.
That's right.
You can't have resurrection without death.
That's right.
There's no resurrection without it.
Right.
So, and well, I mean, Tom Burke is really good on this, because he sees how this works out as the desire to cling on to this temporary life of ours as an ultimate end ends up becoming confusing death with life. Because this, like, it is your death. It is the gateway to life, which doesn't mean that which doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to make the best of your time on earth, but it isn't ultimate. And to make it an ultimate is going to lead to evil.
Right. I guess what I wanted to say about concerning the way Father Bear talks about it is it's kind of the way Jesus talked about it. Jesus, someone said, I want to follow you, but I can't right now because I got to bury my father. And Jesus said, let the dead bury the dead. Right. He didn't go into a diatribe about death. He just said that, but think about that. Like, that's a crazy thing to say, right? Let the dead bury the dead. And so I think that there are ways to talk about these things that are not encouraging suicide, right? But are at the same time give us a deeper understanding of the utility.
Well, because here's the thing, though, because here's what we're here to learn how to die. So you're not actually to see death as part of the process of making you, right? As the final curtain on your becoming.
Well, this is why I mentioned that Tom's comment about mortality and finitude, right? Because, and this is what he's getting at when he says that, is that you have to have an expiry date. Otherwise there's no reason for you to be concerned about anything, in a sense.
Which is why, even though he believes in reincarnation as a fact, he doesn't think it's a good. It's like reincarnation happens because of a soul's avoidance of its.
Oh, you're talking about Tom Burke. Berg.
I thought you said Tom Berg.
No, I was talking about Tom Belt.
Tom Belt.
Yeah.
I'm bad. My hearing is not good.
It's okay. It's okay. We
not even close.
Tom's probably like, I believe in reincarnation.
No, I love what you said about time and Grim. I had to. I turned off my camera and my mic because I had to, because I had some cramping last night and I drank a lot of water. So, and my bladder is not infinite. So I had to get up. But I heard Sherry while she was talking during that, and my impulse to start singing "Time Is on My Side" in the John Goodman fashion from Fallen was also very, very strong. So my not being in the room and my mic being muted is also spared people from that moment. But it was interesting because the way you were talking about time being on our side, you were talking about how our very finitude, our very temporality is the tool that God uses to shape us. That's what I took you to mean.
Yes, that's
what
I
beautiful.
do mean.
And it's perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it has to do with vulnerability, right? It's the body question. It's all that stuff.
Well, it also explains why there's becoming at all. Right? Because you wouldn't need becoming.
Yes.
You only need to be coming for created beings such as us.
Mhm.
So it then becomes, yeah. That's I really like that. That's good. That's good.
Well, this is why a lot of the church fathers talk about us as being in some kind of like embryonic stage, right? Spiritually speaking.
Right.
And that we have to, and yeah, I mean, Jesus said you have to be born again. You're gonna have to do this all over again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it's interesting. And then of course then you get into the whole idea of metamorphosis and caterpillars and butterflies and pupa and all the rest of it, right?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's like I don't know. It seems to me that people that have this dread of death and fear that death is this ultimate, they don't pay very close attention to nature.
No.
Because death seems to be, if you have any eye for nature at all, death seems to me to be very transitory.
Well, the other thing is death is okay. So I was walking once in a place called Cathedral Grove on Vancouver Island, and it's got these huge giant Sitka spruce. And one of them was down on the ground, and these trees are like 3, 4, 5 feet in diameter, and this giant massive thing is laying on the ground dead, covered in moss because it's on the west coast, right?
Everything
Vancouver
here is
Island.
covered with moss. Well,
and
at least everything north of San Francisco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then on there is like this parade of plant life, right? Where you've got various little things growing on top of this dead tree. And some of those things are trees of the same sort. So
Right.
growing on this old Sitka is another Sitka, a baby Sitka, right? Growing off its parent, essentially, and that dead tree is providing nutrition for all that other plant life. Okay, now that's a completely biological explanation for something, but there's a spiritual understanding in that too, in my opinion.
Well, yes,
right?
Yes, of course there is. Okay, so this actually, believe it or not, this line of thinking actually connects us back to Harding, right?
Yes.
Where Harding is talking about the, like, everything has a view in and a view out. He's talking about the layers going both directions, and talking about like how like the identification of what we see in the mirror as us is a mistake. It has to be a mistake. It's like what you are, it cannot be defined by any set of qualia.
Yeah, like he
Which
says
means that if the qualia of what you are change, that doesn't mean you go away.
No, and that's why I can't believe in annihilationism, because does anything really
Nothing
die?
is annihilated. Annihilationism is the most obviously incorrect thing.
It's a very silly idea. It's a very silly idea. Yeah, that's the best word I can think of for it. But so it's like, oh, what was I going to say?
I like my qualia too, Antonio. There's nothing wrong with liking your qualia. Don't be so unwilling to or so cling to them so hard that you're unwilling to face your own death well.
Yeah. Recently, Joseph sent me a thing about caterpillars turning into butterflies, and apparently
Luke, that's a false statement. That's just that's a very false statement.
Apparently the caterpillar turns to goo in the chrysalis, right? And they've done these experiments where they've shocked the goo in the chrysalis with electrical impulses.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the caterpillar, when the butterfly emerged, used the same impulses to see if the butterfly would react, and it did. I don't know how they did this, but this is an experiment. Okay, so this caterpillar is literally goo. Like I had no idea. I thought
Wow.
that they, and that the butterfly wings emerge out of a goo, Nate. Like, think about that.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. I hope it's true, because if it is, it makes it even more astounding, right? But it doesn't matter if it is or not, because either way, a caterpillar becoming a butterfly is an amazing thing, right? And like I said to Luke the other day, Luke Johnston, I said, I'm going to wear the hell out of that, example, because it's just so good. It's so good. The dragonfly is very similar, the dragonfly larva in the water, and then they emerge into this just completely other thing. Cuckoo dolls.
Oh, Luke.
Yeah.
You don't have low quality qualia, though. You have very high quality qualia. So, you're not letting you get away with that one. So, yeah. So, it's interesting that we started talking about evil and we came back around to death. Is there anything to make out of that? I did say evil. I suspected it would happen. I called the chat evil and death. I knew it would circle around to this.
Well, the reason is because I'm going to say this bold statement. I don't think that we actually know what evil is. We think we know what evil is, but we don't know what it is. And we want to call things evil because we have a moral code that tells us that they're evil. But this is the problem that Ivan makes in Brothers Karamazov. He decides for God what is evil and refuses God on the basis of his own morality. And we don't have that. We don't have that kind of knowledge. We don't have the knowledge of good
because
and evil.
we ourselves are incomplete. So we cannot fill in the gaps, right? So I mean, like one good analogous way of thinking about evil is to think about gaps, to think about holes, to think about things that need to be filled in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a good that is not yet there because it's missing. Well, because we ourselves are incomplete and moving toward wholeness and being made whole, how could we possibly?
Yeah. Well, see, this is the thing. We ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that is what we are tasked with. And that is going to be the hardest thing for us to understand, is the difference between. And I would posit that there is, wow, I'm going to
that we need to complete the job, that we're part of a work.
Yes, but the end is apokatastasis. The end is the reconciliation of all things, and good and evil are a duality, and somehow they're going to be reconciled. And until then, we will not understand what.
Well, I would say that they're already resolved in the person of Christ, and so
and the person of Christ is.
And the job of the church is to start actually doing the work, to bring what has already been revealed into being. It's not going to just happen.
Well, see, this is why I think that we are to imitate Mary, right? That we are to say, "Let it be unto me," and then we will be able, because of our finitude, because of the point that Tom made earlier, we will be able to say that it is good, right? Even death, and even the seemingly evil that has befallen us in the world. And I understand that we have to be careful about how we talk about these things, because we also don't want to call evil good.
We had a question earlier. We had a good question. We had a good question earlier that we just didn't. Chad was in the middle of giving a very heartfelt story, so there was not a good time to bring it up. But I think we've inadvertently answered the question because of some of the way we've talked about death and nature. But someone asked if there's a way to reconcile the Christian view of death with the narrative of evolution, and I think we've been doing that.
And I think that that's exactly right, because it's what evolution is becoming. right?
Well, and also it's like Tomberg. It's like we have to stop seeing evolution as merely a struggle for existence, and we have to see the other side of it, right? Because evolution is not like there would be no possibility of having an organism that was a coherent whole that functioned if there was not also cooperation in evolution.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so this is where I think, and this is where our role as mediators between heaven and earth and as stewards comes into play. I really think it's time for us to stop looking at evolution as something that happens to us and something that we are actively participating in with God. That's our actual job. And the cooperation for the existence is the call.
The call of God on your life?
On us, yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than struggle for existence against one another, we should be cooperating with God for the existence of all things, which is in peace and Sabbath.
Yeah, and which is a call to adventure, right?
Yeah,
because it's going to require
a big job.
1 foot in chaos and 1 foot in order.
Sure,
that's what it requires.
Absolutely, and we'll make mistakes, because we're incomplete.
Right. And Antonio just says, is Sherry saying we can't understand what evil is at all? That's kind of what I'm saying, yes. But I don't like to be adamant about anything, really.
Well, that's why, but here's the thing, though.
Evil we can know.
This is why this is why the traditional theological definitions of it has always been as like a privation of being, because it's like, it's hard. It has an essential nothingness that makes it hard to define. Yes, I had the same problem earlier, Tom. Yeah. So, all right. I think we can wrap this one up.
Yeah, I think so too.
Unless someone else wants to join us and push the conversation in an interesting direction. Yeah. I think it's been a good little chat. Well, thanks for joining me this morning, Sherry, to do this little live stream. Oscar, I hope you get a chance to watch this back.
Yeah, me too.
I just want to let you know that we really do a necessary evil. Interesting, Tom. I have to think about that one. But yeah, Oscar, if you watch this back, we really appreciate the tough questions you ask us and your participation in the channel. And I hope you found this of some use.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We got a lot of great questions from the chat today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.